Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. This program is dedicated to doing two things. One is to give us a greater confidence in the historicity of the Bible, that the things that we find in the Bible actually happen to real people living in real times. And secondly is to give us some background information about some things that might enable us to understand what was transpiring in the Bible in a more clear way. We've been looking at ancient times, so we've been in ancient times since the beginning of the program and continue to look at the different civilizations that have come on the scene following the Great Flood and then the Tower of Babel. We're in the midst of looking at the civilization which is called the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Now, the Assyrian Empire that was in existence prior to the time period we're now entering went into a period of decline. And probably during that period of decline is when the prophet Jonah arrived on the scene in Nineveh. And you remember what happened there. And so that change of heart of the Assyrians, those cruel people, lasted for about a generation. And then a fellow by the name of Tiglath-Pileser III came upon the scene and took control of the throne. Tiglath-Pileser III, that's not an easy name to say or spell, I suppose, if you were a first grader. But he was a good administrator and a military leader who seized the throne, and I think I'll just call him Tig III, if that's okay with you. In 743, he fought against a coalition in Syria, possibly led by Uzziah, also called Azariah, who was the king of Judah. Tig III boasted, "I overwhelmed him, and he fled like a bird alone." Well, on this chart we can see where Azariah, or called Uzziah, is located on the chart, and then at the same time in Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, Menahem is the king who is in control. In 733 BC, Israel's king Pekah, you see there on this chart, who ascended to the throne by means of murder, rebelled against paying the tribute to Assyria. This rebellion was not joined by Ahaz of Judah, leading to an invasion of Judah by Pekah and the king of Damascus. This brought about then the summoning of Tig III by King Ahaz of Judah in order to drive away King Pekah of Israel and the Assyrian forces from Damascus or Aram. You find this in 2 Kings 15 and 16. Now Isaiah warned King Ahaz against such an alliance with this heathen nation of Assyria in chapter 7 of his book, but he did it anyway. Tig III took Damascus and present-day Iran or Syria, and then annexed also half of Israel under Pekah's leadership. Large numbers of Israelites were carried into captivity as slaves. Here is a tablet showing the tribute from King Jehoaz, or Ahaz, of Judah. Tig III killed the king of Aram, and the king of Israel appointed Hoshea, then deported many from Israel, just like the Bible says, and received tribute from Ahaz of Judah. Now, the Bible tells us that Hoshea is the one that killed Pekah, but apparently, at least from what this tablet shows us, the Assyrians were behind it. Apparently inspired by an altar seen while meeting with Tig III in Damascus, King Ahaz not only has an alliance with him, but had a new altar based on that design that he saw, that idolatrous altar built for the temple in Jerusalem. Ahaz was very wicked. He worshipped idols and even burned children in sacrifice. Tig III boasted of receiving tribute from Ahaz, the scribe naming him as Yehoahaz, which includes the name Yahweh. Yeah, you heard that part, as part of the name, which is not given in the scriptures. We just know him as Ahaz. But Tig III knew him as Yehoahaz. Interesting. These circumstances apparently kept Assyria from attacking Judah for a few more decades. Another notable thing that occurs during this reign of Ahaz and this whole situation of the alliance with Assyria and war with Israel and Syria is that this is the time when the virgin birth was predicted in Isaiah chapter 7. It is King Ahaz to whom Isaiah comes and says, ask Yahweh for a sign. And Ahaz refuses to do that, and so Isaiah says, well, I'll give you a sign. The virgin or the maiden will conceive and bear a son, and so on. So you can look that up if you're unfamiliar with that. Hoshea, not the prophet of Israel, but Hoshea, who becomes king of Israel, got that position by assassinating Pekah, and he reigned 9 years in subjection to Assyria, paying tribute. Hoshea may have received encouragement from Tig III, who recorded, quote, they, the Israelites, overthrew their king Pekah, and I placed Hosea as king over them, unquote. He then allied himself with Egypt, attempting independence by withholding the tribute following the death of Tig III. This is a picture of a 1-inch long oval-shaped seal that has been found from this period of time that was inscribed in Old Hebrew. And it says that it belongs to Abdi, servant of Hosea, or Hoshea. It includes, in breach of Moses' second commandment, a depiction of its owner, Abdi, which is a name identical with the Obadiah of the King James and other Christian Bibles, whom we may guess to have been one of the chief ministers of the Israel king Hosea. Now, if you look at this, can you observe what country may have had a great influence on Hoshea's Israel? Look at the dress of Abdi. Well, he is represented as bare-chested, wearing a long kilt, and holding a papyrus scepter with a winged disc at his feet. That's all representative of Egypt. So apparently this is the particular time when Egypt was in alliance with Hosea or Hoshea, and had a great influence even to the items that are on this seal. Well, with stunning accuracy, there are 4 inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III, Tig III, which confirms the biblical story in 732 BC. First, that Tig III kills Rezin, king of Aram. Tig III kills Pekah, king of Israel. Tig III appoints Hoshea as king of Israel. Tig III deports many from Israel to Assyria. And I'm going to add a 5th one. Jehoahaz, or Ahaz, king of Judah, Israel and Aram were vassals of and paid tribute to Tig III. Those are all things that we find in the Assyrian inscriptions that are also what we find in the biblical record. I just want to see what the extent of the empire was under Tig III, and you can also see the deportations. Tig III area of dominance is in the orangish in purple under Tig III. The other arrows are showing later deportations under subsequent rulers, which we will get to as we move along here. But you can see that he took many of the people from the northern kingdom of Israel and took them up into the area of Nineveh. So many of the Israelites were deported there. Now, just as a brief side note, I'd like to tell you what's going on in other parts of the world as we come to it. At the same time that this is occurring, in Greece, there was a battle between 300 Argives and 300 Spartans. And they battled until only 2 Argives and 1 Spartan remained. So final score, 2-1. Well, so we see that the northern tribes of Israel, which is the nation of Israel, have been captured by Assyria. And we have the death of Tiglath-Pileser, which has led to rebellion by some of the vassal states, which brings us to the next ruler of Assyria, whose name is Shalmaneser V. Shalmaneser V laid siege to Samaria, the capital of Israel, for 3 years. And that's because Israel decided to withhold the tribute upon the death of Tig III. 20,280 people were captured. The excavations of Samaria by recent archaeologists have demonstrated that the city had been surrounded with a double wall that had been further strengthened prior to the arrival of the Assyrian army. So they're trying to hold off against this army. In the northern section of the Acropolis, that's the high hill upon which the city was built, where they would have been most vulnerable, the wall, solid stone through and through, was 30 feet thick. That ought to be enough to withstand any of the siege engines, you would think, of Assyria. But Assyria could afford to just stay there. And as I said, they laid siege to the city for 3 years. In 724, the Israelites were attempting to bargain with Shalmaneser. Hoshea, the king, went to try to strike a deal, and instead he was imprisoned. So that's sort of signaling the beginning of the end of the capital Samaria and the northern nation of Israel. But Shalmaneser V died suddenly during the siege of Samaria. And so his spot is taken over by Sargon II. And so under his leadership in 722, Israel fell to Assyria. And he claimed credit for the fall of Israel, although he kind of came to the game a little bit late. Israel was deported en masse, beginning the sect of the Samaritans. We find that in 2 Kings 17:6. Now, what do I mean by the sect of the Samaritans? Well, the Samaritans are a group of people that we find in the Gospels, certainly in the New Testament, and prior to that, they are the result of what happens when Assyria deports Israelites from the northern kingdom of Israel, because at the same time they imported people from other places. So the Israelites that remain on the land of northern Israel end up intermarrying with those that are imported from other areas, and they were imported from areas that were far away in the Assyrian Empire. And the reason the Assyrians did that was trying to mix up the population so that there are not enough people speaking the same language or the same culture that could band together to rebel against Assyria. A pretty smart way to approach a conquered people or conquered groups of people. But the result for Israel was that this intermarriage that occurred between the native Israelites and those that were imported caused the northern kingdom to be populated by people of mixed ethnic groups. So they watered down the Israelite or the Hebrew line, so that by the time we get into New Testament times, and even when we get to the time during the Persian Empire that Nehemiah comes back to rebuild the walls of the city of Jerusalem, and the Samaritans, which is now what the people are called who are living in the northern, what had been the northern kingdom of Israel, these mixed breeds want to help, and Nehemiah says, no way, you guys are no longer pure Israelites or pure Hebrews. And on into the gospel period, we see that they are really despised by the Jewish people in Judea at that time, which had been Judah. So that's a little bit of background of the Samaritans and why they were so hated by the Jewish people. Sargon II gives a description of what he accomplished. He says, I besieged and conquered Samaria, led away as booty 27,000 inhabitants, forming from among them a regiment of 50 chariots. I crushed the tribes of the Arabs who lived far away in the desert and who knew neither overseers nor officials and who had not brought tribute before to any king. And I deported their survivors and settled them in Samaria. So this is the exile then of the northern kingdom that occurs, and you can see that they were taken largely over to the extreme of Assyria, to Ecbatana, near the border of Media. And as I said, the sect of the Samaritans then begins there. Well, in 721, Sargon II was defeated in Babylon, although he did put down revolts in two other places, Hamath and Egypt. In 717, he razed the city of Carchemish, who was under the rulership of King Midas. And you can see where Carchemish is here on the map. Compare that to the Mediterranean Sea, for example. Other names may not be very familiar with you there. In 712, the defeat of the Philistine city of Ashdod was accomplished by Sargon II, and this was led by someone who is called in Isaiah 20, verse 1, the Tartan. So this must have been a significant military leader for the prophet Isaiah to even include his title in the prophecy given about Ashdod. So this title, and we know from Assyrian history, this title was one of the Assyrians' highest military ranks. In 709, Babylon was then recaptured, but in 705, Sargon II was either killed in battle or murdered. He died. That's the most of what we know. The death of Sargon was a sign for new uprisings all over Palestine or the Levant and Syria. Hezekiah stood at the head of the conspirators in the Levant, including Ashkelon, king of Philistia, and Merodach-Baladan, the king of Babylon. The revolt was, as usual, also supported by Egypt. Just to stop for a moment and take a look at where we've been, here's a review of the timeline of Old Testament history. As we begin the Hebrew people with Abraham and his call from Ur and coming into the land of Canaan, we jump ahead to Jacob moving the family to Egypt following Joseph's arrival there. Then we move ahead to Moses leading the Exodus out of Egypt and leading the people to the Promised Land. Joshua leading the people into the land to follow Jericho. We have the period of the Judges. And then following that, David becomes king following Saul, the first king. and he is followed by his son Solomon. At the death of Solomon, the kingdom is divided between the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, and now we most recently then have seen in 722 BC the fall of Israel, or the northern kingdom. That takes us now to the next Assyrian leader, and his name is Sennacherib. You might notice the cherub at the end of his name. So the Akkadian language is similar to Hebrew in some respects, not in the way it's written, but by that point, most of the people in that entire area were speaking Aramaic, and that's similar to Hebrew, and so the word cherub that we find here in his name was similar to the word cherub in Hebrew. This is also the time of King Hezekiah of Judah. This is a slide that tells us a little bit about King Sennacherib. We see he was a great king. He wasn't modest, bragged about sacking 89 cities and 20 villages. He burned Babylon, ordered most of its inhabitants killed. He's the first Assyrian ruler who used a navy. As you can tell by the maps we've looked at in the past, Assyria is not exactly a land which is on any kind of ocean, but with the lands they've conquered, now they do reach over to the Mediterranean Sea. You can see that he had problems with Babylon during his rule, claimed to have destroyed the city, and you can read a little bit about that. He was able to retain the lands conquered by his father and even threatened the Egyptian frontier. King Sennacherib moved his capital from Dur-Sharrukin to Nineveh. It was established along the Tigris River, that famous river. All right, for Sennacherib, he mostly followed peaceful pursuits, aside from what he did to Babylon, and he built up Nineveh. That was his concentration, was building up the city of Nineveh so it could be a great capital city for him. This is a timeline of Assyria. You can see where they fit in. The different emperors or kings we've had begin with Tiglath-Pileser III, and then we have Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, and now Sennacherib comes in where that arrow is. Below that, we've seen that the overlapping with the kings of Israel and Judah. With the Assyrian emperors, we have Uzziah and Jotham. Then we move to King Ahaz. And now as Sennacherib is coming on the scene, King Hezekiah is in Judah, but he is not only king during Sargon II's rule, but on into the rule of Sennacherib. So you can see then on the bottom, 4 kings of Judah are included, and you can see some of them were good, some not so good, and we have Hezekiah who straddles the reigns of 2 of the Assyrian emperors. Hezekiah himself falls between 2 of the worst kings in Judah's history, his father and his son. Hezekiah repaired the temple in Jerusalem and brought about a reformation. He promoted the resumption of normal worship with the keeping of the Passover. If you remember, Josiah did much the same thing. The resulting spiritual awakening caused the people to break down the images and the groves that were used to worship pagan gods and to destroy the high places of this pagan worship. He also destroyed, if you remember, the bronze serpent. Do you remember that? Do you remember the bronze serpent? The bronze serpent was what Moses had made and erected as the Israelites were coming from Egypt toward the promised land. And God had, because of their disobedience, sent poisonous snakes among them. And they cried out to God for mercy, and God had Moses erect this, that if anyone looked on the bronze serpent, then he would be cured. So why did he destroy it? Well, we find in 2 Kings 18 that some were burning incense to the bronze serpent. They had made an idol out of something that was an instrument of God's grace. So Hezekiah destroyed it. Hezekiah recognized what it was. The Hebrew word there is Nehushtan. The power, however, was not in the object. And that's the problem with religious artifacts. Some have wondered, well, why don't we have some of the artifacts that were used in Old Testament times? Well, if we had them, what would happen? People would do the same thing that they did with the bronze serpent. They would begin to worship them. Probably why we don't even have the original manuscripts of the New Testament or the Old Testament. If we had the originals, people would tend to worship them. So it was something that Hezekiah did, and God was pleased with Hezekiah destroying this bronze serpent. But it's interesting that in the New Testament, the bronze serpent is a type of Jesus on the cross. Now let's see. I want to go back and make sure there's one more thing we're going to talk about with Hezekiah, and that is the cutting of the Siloam water conduit in Jerusalem, and we'll come to that a little bit later. Next, we want to go back to Sennacherib around 695. Sennacherib found it necessary to leave his rebuilding effort in Nineveh in order to put down rebellions to the south, one against the Elamites who had taken over Babylon. His first victory in the first battle on the banks of the Tigris River was marked by the following description. With the dust of their feet covering the wide heavens like a mighty storm, they drew up in battle array before me on the bank of the Tigris. They blocked my passage and offered battle. I put on my coat of mail, my helmet, emblem of victory, I placed upon my head. My great battle chariot, which brings low the foe, I hurriedly mounted in the anger of my heart. The mighty bow was Asher. Remember, Asher is the name of the god from which they get their name, Assyrians. Had given me, I seized in my hands. The javelin piercing to the life I grasped. I stopped their advance, succeeding in surrounding them. I decimated the enemy host with arrow and spear. All of their bodies I bored through. I cut their throats like lambs, cut off their precious lives as one cuts string. Like the many waters of a storm, I made the contents of their gullets and entrails run down upon the wide earth. My prancing steeds, harnessed for my riding, plunged into the streams of their blood as into a river. The wheels of my war chariot, which brings low the wicked and the evil, were bespattered with filth and blood. With the bodies of their warriors I filled the plain like grass. Their testicles I cut off and tore their privates like the seeds of cucumbers in June. Then they fled from me. They held back their urine, but let their dung go into their chariots. 150,000 of their warriors I cut down with the sword. Wow, what a description of that battle. Well, in 688, Sennacherib laid siege to Jerusalem once again. Within the walls of Jerusalem lived about 25,000 people. Hezekiah began to prepare extensively for the coming conflict. What can he do against this great nation of Assyria, who conquers everyone with whom they come in contact, who batters down whatever walls they come to, who lays siege to nations and cities so that they cannot escape, and is very brutal with those that they capture? What is Hezekiah to do against this tremendous foe? Well, you'll have to come back next time to find out how Hezekiah trusts in Yahweh. Next time on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.